evening. My name is Mark Cervenka, joining from Houston, Texas, and it's my pleasure and honor to welcome everyone to the book launch of That Which Remains, the third and final volume in the Anna Klein series by author John Yetman. This book follows The Roses Underneath and What Is Forgiven. The series illuminates the chaos that surrounded the safety and whereabouts of Europe's art treasures after World War II. Today's program includes a variety of elements, including discussion with John, a chat with Louis Roemer, son of Captain James Roemer, a video tour of the site in Wiesbaden, Germany, where the books are set. And for those of you who have read the first two volumes, you'll get to meet Anna and Cooper through the acting skills of Elizabeth and Tyson Miller. One note, we will have a question and answer period at the end of the program. And I understand you will have to sign into YouTube in order to submit a question. So first, I'd like to introduce the author, but full disclosure, I've known John for over 20 years as my sister-in-law. I am myself an artist and work in arts education, and it's been a delight to have ongoing conversations with John as the Anna Klein trilogy has unfolded. John's background offers unique insight into this series of historical fiction centering on the U.S. Army's effort to organize, find rightful owners, and essentially save much of Europe's art treasures in the immediate aftermath of World War II in Germany. John was born to a Turkish father and a German mother and spent her early childhood growing up in Germany. After time in Australia and the United States, John completed a degree with a major in English at the University of Texas in Austin. And we now join her from her home in Austin, Texas. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Mark. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for doing this. I can't actually imagine anyone more perfect than you to have this conversation because you know the books and the stories so well, and you talked me off the ledge several times. So I'm so glad that we both made it to this point.
It's a lot of fun. It has been a lot of fun talking with you about that, going to museums, looking at art, and seeing how you've made that come alive in your books, which has been really fascinating to me. The books are historical fiction, and writing a work of historical fiction requires an understanding of history involved. So I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about how you researched specific elements of these books.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm kind of a history nerd, and I took one of those personality tests once that informed me that I'm a contextualizer. So I'm always the person that explains to people why things are the way they are, and that usually involves going back in history to look at how things came to be, how we arrived at this point. So I was always thinking that I would like to write something about this period in history. I didn't quite know what that story would be. There are so many stories about World War II. But, one of the things that I didn't read in English language books for sure were stories from the German perspective. And so that always interested me because that was obviously, with my German mother, that was definitely a personal experience. And I was very interested in that post-war period. And I did a lot of research, books, newspapers, the internet. Just movies are a great resource. It just all kind of becomes interconnected and woven together. Once you start down this path, it just sort of starts to reveal itself everywhere. And, and then I had the additional benefit of having my mom's and my grandmother's personal experiences that they could share with me as well. So all of that kind of was floating around in my head before I could even figure out what to write about. There was just so much possibility.
So you live in Austin, but you made some trips to Germany in your research, and tell us about that a little bit, and kind of how you specifically looked at some of these sites. And then also, if you could talk a little bit about your mother and your grandmother's experience sort of immediately after the war, in how that kind of gave you the a foundation for the books.
So I always had this knowledge of my grandmother's and my mom's life after the war, just this kind of, rebuilding and establishing a new life. So I knew I wanted to write about that, but I didn't quite know what would be interesting. And then one night I happened to come across this documentary called The Rape of Europa, which is about the work of the Monuments Men and the Nazi looting of art. And I had never, ever heard of the Monuments Men. And the fact that so many of them were architects really interested me, because that's what I do in my day job. I write about architecture. And so, so then I got all obsessed with the Monuments Men, and I researched everything there. And then one day I was out on a walk, and the idea of the Monuments Men and my mother and my grandmother's circumstances after the war collided in my head. And that's where the story came from. And so about a year later, I took about a year to teach myself how to write a book, because I didn't really know how to write a book. About a year later, my mom and I went to Wiesbaden, and we met with the city archivist, who was delightful and extremely helpful and gave me so many photos and was just so eager to tell the story. And we walked around the city and visited the building that had been the collecting point. I asked the people at the museum about it at the time. So this was 2010, and they didn't know anything about it. They didn't know anything about the Monuments Men having been there. So this was before the movie came out. This is before, all Monuments Men became much more, people became much more aware of them. So as I became more aware of the Monuments Men, everyone else seemed to too, because apparently that's what happens when George Clooney takes an interest in something. Mm-hmm. So, but, my mother remembered certain things. I remember the archivist told us about the fact that the bust of Nefertiti was at the collecting point, and that they showed us some photos of it on display. And my mother suddenly had a flash that she remembered that because my mother lived just about 30 kilometers away in Darmstadt. And she remembered when she was about 6 years old that her mother, my grandmother, got her all dressed up in her best clothes, and they both got on the train to go to Wiesbaden to see Nefertiti. And of course, my mother was small. She didn't understand what was going on, and she hadn't thought about it until that happened. So little things like that came up throughout the trip, and it was really, it was a wonderful experience, and I was glad I got to do it. I hope I get to go again soon. So, because it's been a long time.
And I hope we all get to travel a little more soon.
Yes.
Right. The story is largely seen through Anna's eyes, and her description of Americans, her use of slang, the way Americans use slang and her German slang, and her descriptions of Americans as Amis offers the readers a really different viewpoint than English readers might expect. So I wonder if that came naturally to you as a writer and as someone who has navigated both German and American culture and is fluent in German.
Yeah, no, absolutely. German was my first language. And so when we moved to the US, I learned English when I was 6. And, we spoke German at home. I did much less so as the years went on. We spoke this weird mixture. My parents would speak to me in German, and I would answer in English. But I was very aware of how you speak when you learn a language versus how you speak when you're a native speaker, and sort of the difference, just the cultural difference between Germans and the formality of German speech versus the kind of casual slang of American speech. To me, especially in the first book, I really focused on Anna was speaking very proper English because, she knew the rules of grammar, and Cooper was kind of speaking the idiom of the time. And I tried to be very careful to not use expressions. And thankfully, I have very helpful readers who alert me to things that are not of the time. And I take, I try to take that very seriously. It always interests me, like when an expression, started to be in use. And so I love the way language, works on a page that shows people that is just such a part of the character. You can do so much with the way people talk in character. So that was a really easy dichotomy to show between the two characters. And it just represented so many different things about who they were and kind of what their worldview was.
Can I ask, if, when you were in Germany and researching, and you had mentioned that the folks at the museum where the collecting point was didn't have any memory, or they didn't know that it was used that way. Did you come across people in the archivist who had information or ideas about the Monuments Men and their role and how they might have viewed them?
Oh yeah, I mean, the people in the archives, the archivist, I emailed him before I went and I said, hi, I'm writing this book. And he said, fine, come by, I'm going to go through the photos and we'll look through them together. And he probably had 100 photos for me, digital photos, all ready for me to look at. I mean, he was just waiting for someone to ask him this question. So it was very exciting. And he was extremely helpful and happy to talk about it. So that was just such a blessing. It was very, very exciting.
The books are so visual in a ways, and I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but those images must have been so helpful in your setting up scenes and thinking about how things were going to happen.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time going through, Google did this thing where they put all of Life magazine photos online. And so, I mean, I spent hours of looking at photos from Life magazine of post-war Germany. So sort of photos of people lined up for food or people, cleaning up bombed out areas, all of that kind of Life magazine. And that really informed the first book. That just, I spent so much time. I had this whole wall of photos printed out of this world that Anna lived in. And so that helped me a lot. The internet can be a wonderful place. So yes. It was very helpful.
The internet is also wonderful because we can chat with people from all over the world and all over the place. And we'd like to now bring in someone from Ohio, and I'd like to introduce Louis Roemer and have Louis join us. And speaking of the historical nature of this book, there is probably no one as well situated to kind of talk about the Monuments end of it than Louis. Louis is the son of Monuments Man James Roemer, who was a captain, and you'll see him, he's at the top of the stairs pointing. That's Louis's father right there. He was also later director of the Museum of Modern Art, and I would like to really welcome Louis and just start out by give a little background on your father and how he ended up in the Monuments.
Well, thank you for that generous introduction. Though small correction is the Metropolitan Museum.
What did I say?
Not the Museum of Modern Art.
I'm sorry.
My sister had a separate job at the Museum of Modern Art, but that's as close as we got.
I apologize.
No problem. Well, he was working at the Metropolitan. That's why I presumed to make that correction. And he had actually had a almost illustrious career already at the age of 39. It was one of these situations where his boss died suddenly, and there he was, a young, assistant curator, and suddenly he was in charge, as I understand, of finishing the building of the cloisters in Fort Tryon Park, and they sent him off to get more money from donors, including John D. Rockefeller, and to measure the site and make sure the bricks all fit and the objects were all in the right. So he was sort of familiar with the concept of restoration and saving monuments in that very different context where various collectors had aggregated parts of the cloisters, which he was then involved in reassembling and restoring. So in a way, he was sort of the perfect fit to become a monuments man. I'm sorry, that's my wife calling. I don't know if I can stop that. There she is. I thought I had everything on silent. She doesn't even know I'm doing this. She's in Connecticut, taking care of our new grandchild. But so he was, not only the perfect fit from the point of view of his training as an art historian and his administrative experience with putting buildings back together, but also he grew up speaking both French and German very well, so that when he found himself in Normandy and Brittany and Paris and later in Germany, he spoke both of those languages with a year of schooling in France and with parents who spoke German. And so he was really just the right man at the right place. And it wasn't quick. He had to go through basic training, and it took him a long time to figure out whom they needed to fill these roles. And that will be the first chapter in our hopefully upcoming book, where he talks about KP duty and things like that. But that's the background of how he got to be a monuments officer, as they were called then.
So you and John have corresponded over email while she's been writing. How did you guys connect?
I think I heard about the book from my sister. I think I mentioned that, or one of us mentioned that. And I read the book, and there was some detail which came to my attention. I thought, well, I'm just gonna. I guess I found Internet Strikes Again. I found Janan's website and sent her an email to say how much I liked the book. I think that's how we first connected.
Yes, I woke up one morning to an email from a Louis Rorimer, and I just about fell out of my chair. So because I had been so, obsessed, I'll admit, with the Monuments Men for so long, and had spent so much time with them that they were very real to me. And, James Rorimer was definitely one of the models for Cooper. It was just, if you would have told me, when all those weeks and months when I was sitting by myself at 4:30 in the morning writing this book that I was sure no one would care about, that one day I would get an email from Louis Rorimer, I would have never, ever believed you. So that's been just so exciting.
Well, I didn't mention that, not to interrupt, but I didn't mention that, one of the traits that Cooper has, and I think it appears in all three volumes. I think that was a feature of my father's way of operating. I got to meet a number of the Monuments Men through the promotion of the book and the movie, through the kind offices of Robert Edsel. And I met Harry Ettlinger, and he had worked a lot with my dad in Germany in particular. And he said, he wasn't afraid to bend the rules. He knew the job, and he figured out how to get it done one way or the other. Not that he was a rule breaker, but he knew how to work around things to do what needed to be done.
Good. I'm so glad. Yeah. See, it must have seeped into my brain. So.
Right.
Louis, you mentioned the movie. How do you think that affected your family, and how did you guys feel about the movie, and how did that change any of your way of thinking about your dad?
Well, I think it was a big event in the life of our family. Obviously, for one thing, everybody I knew at work in my law firm said, "Ooh, we had no idea you were such a cool guy." It was interesting. All of a sudden, they'd known me for 35 years. And when my dad was played by Matt Damon, suddenly I was a cool guy. That was kind of interesting. And
there he is.
I really have to thank Robert Edsel. He brought in all of the families whom he could locate, I think. And we were very much part of the project as it gathered steam. And by the time the movie came along, because he got resources from us, and he introduced us to each other, and it was really a fabulous experience. And probably the high point, the Höhepunkt, probably was the preview of the movie, where we got to meet some of the stars, and some of the other families were there as well. And then after that, there was a celebration of the award of the Congressional Medal of Honor. I think that's the right name, to the Monuments Men. As a group, we all got to go to Washington and watch the award. I couldn't get within 500 yards of the actual gold medal. There was a line, half an hour long to see the medal. But I have a replica here in the other room.
I have a replica too. I got
Yeah.
Yeah, it was for our family, to be more specific. It was really a great thing.
And what's interesting too is the other weird thing is that when I was writing, in my head, the movie of my book, that Matt Damon played Cooper in my mind. So that was another weird thing.
Oh, interesting. Well, everybody always asks me, well, did you get to meet Matt Damon? And the answer is yes, we actually did, for 2 minutes on the red carpet before the preview showing, and he was very cordial and obviously understood the role very well. I always thought actors kind of just got up there and read the lines, but he had really absorbed his character, and I thought he did a great job. Of course, there are, different people have different views about the movie. I think Mark, that was something you asked. I think people who are in the art world and great distinguished scholars, they may be less enthusiastic than I am, because it was intended to be a popular movie, and it was quite popular. It was held over at our local theater anyway. And, my wife, Savory, she watched it at least 5 times. I think I only watched it 3, and, we loved it. We thought it was terrific. But there's that branch of the professional world that would have liked something more, I don't know what you could say, scientific and precise. But hopefully those people will all read my book, which I'm hoping will come out a year from now, which tells the same story.
Yes.
Yeah, it's and I want to ask you about that. And I do know that your father worked at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and when he returned from the war, he did publish the memoir, which was called Survival, the Salvage and Protection of Art in War, and he published it in 1950, which I understand now is a very rare book and very expensive to try and
it's hard to get.
Yeah. And so how did you come about taking on that project, and what have you learned that you may not have known either about the Monuments Men or your father during your project in republishing the book?
Well, I really learned a lot, because my sister and I, we knew perfectly well that what my father had done in the war, and he talked about it from time to time, but certainly didn't dwell on it. We knew his book was on the shelf there, but neither of us ever actually read it. So when the Monuments Men kind of got to be a thing, someone asked me to give a talk at my book club, we'll call it. And I said, oh, yeah, sure, I can do that. And then I realized that I really didn't know anything except what I was beginning to learn through the more modern books. So that was the first time I really sat down and read Survival, and really, I had no idea what a fascinating story it was. And then the more popularized books came out, and I got to learn more. But the other thing that happened to me is I started following, being a lawyer, I started following the art world and the papers, and seeing about all the litigation about what the Monuments Men were not able to return. And that really got me interested in that whole branch of it, which I've tried to learn a little bit about and keep up with. That's been fun. Just today I was finally getting around to reading about the recent Supreme Court case on the denial of the plaintiff's claims for the U.S. courts to deal with the claimed confiscation of the, or virtual confiscation, let's call it, of the Guelph treasure. And I'm particularly interested in the Guelph treasure because there's a part of it here in Cleveland acquired before all of those events. And, so all of that, it all ties together. And I found it was just a really good fit for me as I approached retirement. And so that's kind of kept me busy when I'm not feeding the cows for the last 10 years.
One last question, and really quick, can you talk about how it was for you reading the Anna Klein trilogy and reading Jonan's books?
Well, I think I've used the phrase before that, it really brings the story to life. And it adds to the story in a lot of ways by doing that. And I actually brought with me a sentence from my father's book here, not to belabor the point, but it says, Wiesbaden became the Seventh Army's most important collecting point for German-owned objects. And, that's pretty much all he says. I mean, there's a paragraph. But, when you read 3 books about it with these colorful characters and very emotionally thoroughly worked out characters with, developing characters who change over the course of the 3 volumes, you almost feel as though you were there. So it was just made the whole experience, just a whole different facet to the, you might say, more scholarly experience of working with my father's materials and the legal developments.
Well, Louis, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you'll hang out backstage, as it were, and really appreciate your time. It's an honor to meet you, and really thank you for your thoughts.
Well, thank you. It's an honor for me. I'm happy to hang out backstage and be available for questions if there are some.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you. Louis.
So now we have some videos from Wiesbaden, and Jonan is going to introduce those.
Yes. So I thought, since we can't, for the past year, we weren't able to go anywhere, and we were actually starting to think about maybe going to Wiesbaden last summer, and then of course that didn't happen. I recruited this an amazing woman who I met on Twitter. So this is another weird connection. Her name is Tanya Banzau, and she is an art historian, provenance researcher, cultural tour guide, and social media person who lives in Wiesbaden. She has a PhD. She wrote her dissertation on the work of the Monuments Men at the Wiesbaden Collecting Point. So she's probably the only other person on the planet that gets as excited about this stuff like me. And I believe she and I both call it our collecting point, because that's how we feel about it. And she has very kindly walked around town on a beautiful day in Wiesbaden a couple of weeks ago to show us some of the spots that take place, where the stories take place. So we've got some 4 short little videos. Of 2 are of the Collecting Point building, which you can't go into right now because of COVID, obviously. And the other 2 are of the street where Anna lives. And so please enjoy.
You know the Central Collecting Point Wiesbaden from the Anna Klein trilogy, of course. This building here was its home. Numerous buildings in which art previously has been shown had been damaged or destroyed during the Second World War, and countless works of art had been removed for safekeeping. Now these artworks had to be reassembled and checked for their provenance. For this purpose, the American Armed Forces had established a special unit of art protection officers, who are now known as the Monuments Men. One of their bases of the activities after World War II was established here in this building of the Wiesbaden Museum. Here in summer of 1945, they began storing works of art, many of which had come from Berlin museums, from the National Gallery, the Art Library, the museums of prints and drawings, the Egyptian department, and other collections. That's the main entrance where the statue of Goethe is looking at us. But I also want to take you to the back side of the building. That's where the employers would enter the building. And this here is the back side of the museum. The back doors where Anna and Cooper probably entered the building in the mornings and where their offices would be located. But it's also the place, of course you have to picture a lot of barbed wire here around this building, where the artworks came onto several trucks into the building, into their storage facilities. I'm now standing in the Adolfsallee, and you can see already that it's quite dark in here. That's because of these green trees we have here in the middle in this green area, which is now a playground. But the people in summer, they love it living here because it's shadowy and not that hot. But of course in winter times it lacks a little light in the apartments. But now I take you to the place where Anna lived. This place would be Adolfsallee 17, the place where Kanan pictured Anna to live in with her little family. But of course not in the front house. You can see when I turn the camera around here a little how gorgeous the buildings are in the front houses. But they all had back houses, or even two back houses separated by backyards. And that's where Anna and the family actually lived, actually.
So I just want to say that I picked the Adolfsallee number 17 completely randomly. So I was very excited to actually see it in person too, and it looks nice. It looks like a nice place to live. So thank you, Tanya, for bringing that to life. And I'm hoping that we all get to go on trips again soon. And I'm hoping that Wiesbaden will be on our plans. I have a lot more. Tanya made more videos that I'm going to share on social media for different sites that are in the book, and you don't want to miss those. So please follow me on Facebook for those videos, and I'll be sharing those this week.
So John, now we get to meet Anna and Cooper.
Yes.
So everyone. I'd like to bring up Anna and Cooper, and playing the parts of Anna and Cooper are Elizabeth and Tyson Miller. Hi.
Hey, everybody.
A second full disclosure, Tyson and I are related, as he is the son of my cousin, Karen. Tyson is an operatic tenor with a Bachelor of Music from Baylor University and a Master of Music from Rice University. And Tyson and my family had the opportunity to spend many wonderful dinners with him during his study here in Houston while he was at Rice. Elizabeth, originally from Russia, holds a Bachelor of Music from University of Houston and a Master of Music from the Eastman School of Music. And the two met while singing chorus at the Houston Grand Opera. So welcome, Tyson and Elizabeth.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
very much. We're happy to be here.
So let me, I'll set up the scene real quick. So this is the part of the traditional book launch where the author reads a scene, but we thought, I thought that we could do better than that. So, so Tyson and Elizabeth got roped into doing this, and so I'm so thankful. So they're going to read a scene from, it's towards the beginning of the third book. And this is Anna and Cooper talking about the impending reorganization at the collecting point and what that is going to mean for their future. And they're both very worried, and they're both not saying what they really think. So take it away, Anna and Cooper.
All right. Hey, where are you off to? It's freezing out there.
I know, going to get some air for my cat.
Your what?
You know, when you have a cat, because of too much drinking.
Oh, you drank too much and you got a cat?
No. In German, we say that after you drink too much, the next day you have a cat. You don't say that in English?
No, we don't get cats. We get hangovers.
Ours is better, I think. So I'm going to get some fresh air for my cat. Do you want to come?
I have a few minutes. Sure. Where are we going?
I was thinking I'd walk down to the children's school. I've not seen it since they started going because we've been so busy. Oscar seems to be having some run-ins with the teacher, so I thought I might show my face. They get out in a few minutes.
Well, then let's get going. They walk. So apparently there was a big article about us in the New York Times a couple weeks ago. Farmer got a copy this morning. They call us the Venus Fixers in the Sunday magazine, no less.
Is that good or bad?
Well, it gets a lot of readers. The article talks mostly about the excitement during the war. It doesn't mention me. But it's good press. Reminds the brass what the point of all this is. Must have been the brainchild of some publicity flack or some officer called in a favor. The more people know about what this work is about, the longer we get to do it.
I would think they'd want to keep going until the work was done and everything was put back where it should be.
I think that'll take a lot longer than the military has patience for. They walk a few more steps in silence.
You know, it should be you.
So you keep saying.
You aren't afraid to do the right thing. You stand up to those people. The director's job should be yours.
You mean if they offer it?
You don't want it.
It's not that I don't want it, Anna.
Then what?
They're not going to give it to me.
Why on earth not?
I'm too unpredictable. They keep reminding me of all the things they've had to look the other way on. There was that time I lost my sidearm and the whole ugly business with the forgeries last fall. Not to mention the mess with the major. That's the kind of thing that sticks with you in the Army. Anyway, I think someone's got it in for me. And frankly, I don't blame them. I don't think I'm director material. I don't even want to be, really. All those meetings and memos and accountability. Who needs it?
So you'll keep doing the job you have now. That's okay too.
A redeployment's coming, Anna. There's no way around it. I've been in country since before D-Day. They're rotating all of us out. There's not a damn thing I can do about it. And don't think I didn't try.
When?
Don't know. Could be tomorrow. Could be in 2 months. The Army likes to keep everyone on their toes. It's one of their best features.
So you'll go back to Chicago? You'll go home?
I don't know. I have a little ways to go until my tour's up. Until then, I go where they tell me.
How long have you known?
I was going to tell you. I wanted to wait a few more days after the funeral. I didn't want to pile on.
Well, I don't know what to say.
Anna, listen to me. You have to come with me. When I get sent stateside, I mean. You, Amalia, and Oscar, you'll come with me. We can be together. We can start a life there. I know you're about to argue with me. You're about to give me 10 reasons why you can't. But I want you to think about it seriously, please. We can have a life. It'll be wonderful. You can meet my family. We can buy a house and...
When did you become such a romantic? A little house and a dog and a chicken coop. Is that what you're picturing?
I was actually thinking we could get a cat. We could have lots of cats. I believe you already have one. Just say you'll think about it. And of course, you have to talk it over with the children. I really do understand. But I can't not say it out loud anymore, Anna. We're both going to kill ourselves trying to avoid the elephant in the room.
Henry, I'm still married. There are at least 2 elephants in the room.
I know. But maybe you're right. It's your choice. I can't force you to be with me any more than Thomas can force you to be with him. At least I'm smart enough to know that.
I will think very hard about it. I promise. I'll see you tonight.
You bet. I'll see if I can bring you something from the PX along with the firewood. No promises, though.
All right. No promises.
That was so great. I love that.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. That I just. Woo.
You're very welcome.
Thanks, Tyson. Thanks, Elizabeth. That was fabulous. And I know, John, and that is very rich for you to see that. I want to ask you a little bit about dialogue and that, and the dialogue between Anna and Cooper in that scene offers a really rich cultural and linguistic set of clues into their characters. I'm sure many other readers had visual images of the scenes you described while we were reading, and now we got to see some of that. But when you're describing the scenes in the book, the characters, the darkness of the storeroom, the furnishings in Madeline's house, can you talk about how you go about setting that scene up? How do you write that? How do you start?
Well, that's a good question because, like I said, in my day job, I write about architecture. And so what that means is often I look at a lot of pictures and describe what I'm seeing in the pictures. And so that's kind of how I go about the scene. I picture it in my head and then I just describe what I'm seeing. That's the place of Wiesbaden in 1945, 1946 is a character in the book because it is the place, the destruction of it, and all of those circumstances throw up obstacles for the character. So it becomes another character, and I just sort of follow the characters around and describe what I'm seeing. And some scenes are a little bit different. Some scenes are more visceral and personal. But generally, that's kind of how it works with me. I don't know if that's normal or what, but that's how I do it.
So in your research, there were a lot of individuals that you read about and that were part of the Monuments Men, and were there any that particularly stood out to you or led to some of your character development? And specifically, how did Cooper's character evolve?
Yeah, that's a good question. I read Robert Etzel's book, The Monuments Men, and at some point I did put it down because I felt like I didn't want the real life characters to seep too far into the fiction. I wanted them to just kind of have some space in my head to become their own thing. So so Cooper's really he's an amalgam of a number of people. There were these sort of rogue characters, like Lewis was saying, people these were not army, they were not young army, recruits. They were older men who had careers and so had their own way of doing things. And that sort of really appealed to me. So he's really just, I kind of laid the groundwork for him. I knew he was an architect. I knew that he lived in Chicago. And I know that he came from Iowa. And there's sort of a joke in writing circles that there's so many characters that come from Iowa because of the Iowa writing, the University of Iowa writing program. And so sure enough, I went to their summer program and I ended up with a character from Iowa. That's what happens when you go there. And so I knew that about him. I knew that he had a sister who died in the Spanish flu pandemic. And I knew that he had grown up on a farm, but he had moved to Chicago and become an architect. And so those were his roots. And then I just kind of, he just kind of became this person. I saw him through Anna's eyes a lot. He was this American, she describes him often as, his big American ways, his big American smile. And these are all sort of impressions that I think Americans, especially right after the war, left on people. And so it's, I don't have he just became this presence, and he just started doing his own thing. And, he could be annoying, but that's what he did. And, then Anna would get annoyed with him too. So that's what would happen.
Right. I have one more question, but I want to remind everybody that's watching that you can ask questions, and please put those into the question and chat feature in YouTube. And as I think mentioned earlier on, I think you have to sign in to YouTube in order to ask the question, but we welcome those. So John, one of the, I guess, secondary characters, although I don't think of him as much of a secondary character, is Oscar. And he's an interesting character a child whom Anna takes under her wing as if her own child. His character is a Polish boy taken from his family by the Nazis because he looks Aryan with his blonde hair and blue eyes, and the Nazis are intent on stockpiling this image of the ideal Nazi. So what came first here, the character or the idea to include this aspect of the Nazi horror?
Yeah, so yes, exactly. It was the first thing that came was the idea to include this in the story, because the house where Oscar is found in the first book was in real life, did have a connection, that little mansion is a real place, and it had a real life connection to the Lebensborn program. And so, but that part of the story just took all kinds of different turns. At first, it wasn't just one boy, it was a group of children. And that became too unruly, I couldn't get that to work right. And then it just became a girl. And then and her name was Clara, but my daughter at the exact same time made a really good friend who she's still friends with, whose name is Clara. And so I thought, well, we can't have Clara in the book, so we have to change that. And so then I just decided, oh no, he should be a boy. And I named him Oscar. And then once again, he started talking, and he just kind of became his own person. And I honestly thought that Oscar would be a fleeting character in the first book, and that that would be it, but he's not. Oscar thinks all 3 books are about him, and he will not, and I love Oscar. I love him. And I wanted, I'm interested to see what happens to Oscar after this. I mean, I think he probably has a great story. He's just a great character, and he has a mind of his own. I just write down what he tells me. His dialogue, I love writing his dialogue because he has this wry wit, had about all the change I can stand around here. That kind of, he's that, world weary 10-year-old.
He does have a special place in Anna's heart, but you can also tell that he has a lot of affection for them as well, and having taken him. So
yeah, he's a good kid. He loves Amalia. He takes good care of her. And he has been abandoned by 2 mothers in his mind, right? So through no fault of either of his mothers, but in his mind, 2 mothers have left him, and he is very reluctant to attach himself to another person. So Anna has to, she recognizes that, and she has to work a little bit to gain his trust. And so that's a really interesting relationship. I really feel for Oscar. He's really that little guy. He just breaks my heart. So.
Well, not to mention Amalia, who is also a very, very kind and sweet character, and looking for the best in people, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a sort of, children at that time were forced to grow up very quickly, and forced to, I remember at the beginning in the first book, some editor, I think, said, because I had Amalia running around by herself, and she said, well, 5-year-olds don't run around by themselves. And I said, yeah, they did, and the business with the key around that she wears around her neck. That was taken directly from my mother. And that was very typical at the time. These children just running amok in the streets because there were no schools, and, and the parents had to, get on with it and go to work. And so, Amalia she's also, these children they knew that, times were serious and that there was no room for, creating more problems for their parents. And so they tried to do the best they could.
It's a great series, and I've enjoyed reading them all. Where can people get the book?
Well, you can get it. You can get the book from our Amazon overlords at either Kindle version or a print version. I think it's also available on, should be available eventually on bookshop.org. And locally, it will be at Book People in the next few days. So if you're in Austin, please go to Book People and buy the book. But if you're an ebook reader, Amazon has it and you can download it right now. Please tell everyone.
Well, I think it's time for some questions. So I'm going to, we have a question from Suzanne, and I hope you plan to keep writing. You capture dialogue and emotions so well. What's your next series going to be about?
Oh, that's a good question. Hi, Sue. Thanks for your question. I would actually love to keep writing about Oscar. I don't know how people would feel about that. Please feel free to chime in and let me know that, that kid is sticking with me, and I would love to know what he gets up to after this. So that's something I'm kind of kicking around. I have lots of ideas, but that's really I could see that becoming kind of a series, or at least a couple of other stories. And yes, and Danielle says the book is also available at Barnes & Noble. So thank you, Danielle.
Katie asked, did you envision this as a trilogy from the beginning?
That's well, I did not, at the beginning. When I got to the end of the first book, I was like, oh yeah, no, this is going to take a while. So I think I decided at the end of the first book that it was going to be a trilogy. And then that let me kick the can down the road for, at least one more book before I had to decide what was going to happen to Anna and Cooper. So, it was not my original plan, but, it gave me an out at the end of the first book.
David asks, does anyone know how many items of art have, one, been returned to owners, and two, how many remain with unknown owners?
Oh my gosh, that's probably beyond my capabilities. I know, it's an ongoing story. I have a Google alert for Nazi stolen art and restitution, and I get there are stories, weekly about various pieces of art that are now being proven to have been, transferred via forced sale or some other situation in the Third Reich. So it's ongoing. And of course, many things were muddled at the end of the war. And, I think in the book, Anna or Cooper, I think Cooper says at some point, they're going to be still messing with this in, 50 years. And sure enough, here we are, because it's so complicated. And it was just such an enormous crime that undoing it's still a whole bunch of work. But I don't really know what the numbers are. But watch out, I'm going to research it now and I'll find out.
And Adam asked, can you talk about how your characters start talking and changing their own path?
Well, thank you, Adam, for that question. They start talking. I don't know. It's hard to explain. They just start saying things, and then I have to sort of follow them. I know that in the first book there was a scene with Anna where I tried to get her to do something. I mean, I rewrote that scene 15 times easily. And finally, it just wasn't working. And I finally realized because I was trying to get her to do something that she would never do. And I just let it go and let her start talking. And she talked to the other character, and they started interacting, and that's where the story went. And, I think John Steinbeck had a quote about, don't tell me what a character looks like. Show me how they talk and I'll tell you what the character looks like, which is my favorite quote. And so I think just the way people talk, reveals so much about themselves, and they give a lot away when they say things, and I just follow that. I wish I had a more scientific answer, but I don't.
Glenn says, I love Oscar. I imagine him as a symbol of the time, like the main characters. He's lost by the war, and slowly he grows up. Sounds like he's in school now. He's a symbol of the times?
Yeah, I mean, Oscar is, hi, Glenn. Oscar is definitely one that has been batted around by the circumstances, and has lost so much, and is still standing upright and still is thinking about the future. And, he's just kind of moving through this circumstance. And so he's resilient. And for me, I love him so much, but he's a tragic character in a way because, so much was taken from him. And I think he is a symbol of the times, in that way, that he is making the best of the circumstances that he's in, and trying to figure out a way to come out the other side of this. And I mean, he's just a little boy, but he obviously, he has he's developing a moral compass, and trying to figure out a way, into the future for himself. So, I don't know. Like I say, Oscar, he talks to me. So.
Nikki asked, did your mother know that you were going to write a book that had aspects of her childhood?
Oh, yes, for sure. My mom, for the first book, for sure, she was my, I would send her pages to read, and she was, my mom she was a great reader, and she's a great critic, and was very honest. And she told, she would tell me when things were not good, and kind of kept me to the straight and narrow. And she wasn't at all sort of bothered by the fact that I was co-opting parts of her, childhood. And that was generally my experience with most people, that they were very happy to share stories to be included in the book. And so there's quite a bit of my mom and my grandmother in the book. Just little snippets here and there, if it's just a little snippet of dialogue or sort of an attitude about something or an observation they made or a circumstance. It's just little pieces. But yeah, she was absolutely aware. And she went with me on that research trip to Wiesbaden in 2010, and we had the best time. It was great. It was a great trip.
Nice. Linda asked, how long have you been writing fiction?
Since The Roses Underneath was my first book, writing fiction. And like I said, I had to take sort of a year to teach myself. I took a whole bunch of classes writing fiction. I never really wrote a lot of fiction. A very early draft of the first book I sent to a reader who is in publishing. And I mean, it was literally like 2 chapters. And he sent it back and said, you can make stuff up, right? Because I was just sticking so to the actual history because I wasn't used to writing fiction at all. And so it took me a while to loosen up and just start making stuff up and thinking, well, what if this happened? So I've been writing fiction, I guess, for 10 years, maybe. But I have an English degree, so I just want to throw that.
Linda, with a follow-up, how long were these characters living with you before you started writing their story?
Yeah, I mean, there was always going to be Anna and Amalia. Madeline kind of appeared when I started writing the story. It was always going to be centrally about the mother and the daughter. And that they were very heavily influenced by my grandmother and my mother. And so though they were there for a long time before I even had a story. They were characters in my mind. So that was way before I even knew what the story would be or how to write a book. So yeah, they were in there.
David asked, you mentioned writing in early hours of the morning. What is your routine, if you have one?
Well, the pandemic kind of messed this up, but with the first two books, the routine was I get up really early, and the first thing I do is just write on the book for an hour and a half. And I used to be super disciplined and I wouldn't check email and I wouldn't check social media. I would just sit down and write. And that, that was how I got the bulk of it done. And that's my favorite thing, is to write early in the morning. With the pandemic, I wrote a lot of this book. I was basically sitting in my kitchen with people coming down for snacks and things. So this one was a little different, but to me, it's still the best time of day to write is first thing in the morning, like, 4:30 to 6 or 5 to 7, something like that is the best. I don't know. It's my brain and the world is quiet, and you're just in this whole other kind of in-between realm. So that's my favorite time. So I hope I can get that back at some point.
George and Cindy asked, Madeline's sudden death surprised me, falling down the stairs. What made you decide to end her character? It seems so quick.
Well, sometimes bad things happen out of the blue, and they throw a wrench into the works, and you don't expect them. And I felt like Anna, she was very, she was very lucky that she had Madeline, and those things happen, and they shock us into new phases of our lives. And so I wanted something like that for Anna, in terms of this journey that she's on, and trying to figure out what she's going to do with her life, and kind of taking all of her crutches away in a way. So this is what you get to do as a writer.
We've got a couple more questions. We're almost at the end, but we've got a few more questions we're gonna hit. From Stacy, which fiction book touched you the most that made you want to be a writer?
Well, I always wanted to be a writer. I didn't think that was an actual job. So I have an English degree, but I went into publishing. And I worked at a book publisher for a while, and then for a magazine. And then I sort of became a professional writer. And I just decided that, like I said, this idea was kicking around in my head, this idea of my mother, my grandmother at the end of the war. And I always wanted to write about that. And then I didn't quite know, how to go about that. And I will say, I mean, there are many, many books that inspired me, but the book that really got me going is Philip Kerr's first book, which now I can't remember the name of. Oh, March Violets. It's the first one in his Berlin trilogy. He writes about it's a noir series about a detective in Berlin, in Germany, who enters into the Third Reich phase of Germany. And that I really learned a lot about how to make history a character in the book from his books, and how to use historical detail in a story without breaking out of the story and going, oh, and by the way, let me tell you, what's really happening here. So I highly recommend his books if you don't know about them. Philip Kerr, the Bernie Gunther series. If you like noir and you like mysteries, they're a lot darker than my books, but they have an incredible amount of historical detail, and they're just whip smart and great books.
Hey, two more questions. This one from Eileen. Have any of your books been translated into German? If not, they should be.
No, they have not. And yes, I agree. And yes, that's something I should work on. So, but I agree, absolutely. I would love for them to be in German.
Okay. And finally, from Nikki, do you think these books will be offered as audiobooks in the future?
Yes. So Roses Underneath is currently an audiobook, but I am talking with potential audiobook people for the entire series. So stay tuned. So I hope I'll have some news there soon.
John, and congratulations on your book, on the series. It's fabulous. It's a great accomplishment. I want to thank you for spending time, and for all of our guests for spending time with us. Thanks so much, and have a great evening.
Well, thank you, Mark. I want to say thank you to everybody who came. I'm looking at your comments. It's so great that you enjoyed the evening. And Mark, I can't imagine anyone else doing this. You know the book so well, and I'm so grateful that you took the time to do this. I also want to thank my husband, Lee, who is producing this event behind the scenes. And of course, everybody, thank you all for coming. I'm really, really grateful. And please buy the book and tell your friends.